52 times. 52 promises in this letter, one for every week that will pass, while you are living the life you are living now, and not one of them was written to a crowd. Every single one of them was written to a person with a name. That is the thing about the promises of God that the world has never quite understood. They are not general announcements posted on a wall for whoever happens to be passing by. They are not weather reports about the universe. They are the personal, particular, unbreakable word of a Father who has known your name since before there was a you to carry it, and who has never once, in all the long years of your life, had to be reminded of it. You have lived long enough now to know what it feels like to become a stranger in places where you were once known. The doctor's office, where you are a date of birth and a number on a chart. The bank, where the young man behind the desk asks you to spell your surname twice. The church, where the pews you sat in for 30 years now hold faces you cannot place, and where someone kind, meaning nothing by it at all, asks whether you are visiting. You are not visiting. You helped build that place. But there is no unkindness in the world quite like the small, ordinary unkindness of not being recognized where you have always belonged. And so it is possible, I think it is more than possible, that somewhere in the quiet of your own heart, you have begun to wonder whether the same thing has happened in heaven. Not that God has stopped existing. You settled that a long time ago. But whether in the enormous press of the world's need, in the sheer crowd of the living and the dying and the desperate, you have simply slipped down the list. Whether you have become to God what you have become to so many others, a name he would have to look up. Stay where you are. That is exactly the ache this letter was written to answer, and it will answer it not with my reassurance, which is worth very little, but with his own words, which have never yet failed a single soul who leaned on them. My child, a letter arrived for you. It was written long before you were born, and yet every line carries your name. This is a letter from the Father, and when the Father speaks, every word is Scripture, the one who was never counted. Let me begin exactly where the ache begins, because I do not want to walk past it with a word of comfort that has not first been earned, and it is not solved by company, which is what makes it so hard to explain to anyone. You can be surrounded and still uncounted. You can have kind people in and out of the house all week and still lie down at the end of it, having said nothing that anybody actually needed to hear. There is a particular loneliness that belongs to being uncounted. It is not the loneliness of an empty room. That one is easier in its way, because at least it is honest about itself. This is the loneliness of being in a full room and finding that no one turns. It is the family gathering where the conversation moves fast and young and past you, and you sit with your hands around a cup and realize you have not spoken in 20 minutes, and no one has noticed the silence where your voice should have been. It is the phone that rings on your birthday and not on the ordinary days, when the ordinary days are the ones that are long. It is the letter that comes addressed to occupant or to resident, or to the name of a husband who has been gone now for years, and you stand at the door holding it and feel something small give way inside you. You have learned to make your peace with it. That is what the years teach. You tell yourself that everyone is busy, and they are. You tell yourself that this is simply what it is to grow older in a world built for the hurrying, and it is. You have never made a scene about it, never demanded that anyone notice you, because that was never who you were, and it is not who you are now. You have simply gone quieter, year by year, the way a lamp goes dimmer as the room around it grows brighter, until you are not certain anyone would notice if you went out entirely. But here is what I want to name, carefully, before we go any further into this letter. The ache you feel at being uncounted is not vanity, and it is not weakness, and it is certainly not something to be ashamed of before God. It is the ache of a creature made in the image of a God who counts. He is a God who numbers the stars and calls every one of them by name, who counts the hairs of your head, who has kept an accounting of every restless turn you have ever made in a long and difficult season. Being known is not a luxury your heart wants. It is the thing your heart was built for. And when the world stops knowing you, something true in you protests, and that protest is not sin. It is homesickness. So let me take you to a road. It is a long way from your chair, and 4,000 years back, and the woman on it was the least counted person in the whole story she found herself in. Understand first how little she was in that household. She had been acquired, most likely, during the years Abram spent in Egypt during a famine, brought back north as property, along with the sheep and the oxen and the camels. She had no say in the journey that took her hundreds of miles from everything she had ever known. She had no say in the language spoken around her, or the God worshipped in that camp, or the name anyone called her by. And when Sarai, who had waited decades for a child that had not come, decided to solve the problem by handing her maid to her husband, Hagar was not consulted about that either. She was the instrument of somebody else's plan for somebody else's promise. Her name was Hagar, and she was Egyptian, and she was a slave. She had no standing in the household of Abram. She was not a wife. She was a means to an end, handed to a man by another woman as a solution to a problem, and when the solution created problems of its own, she was the one who paid for them. Sarai dealt harshly with her. That is what the record says, plainly and without excuse. And Hagar did the only thing a person with no rights and no protection can do. She ran. Picture the road. It ran south out of the settled country toward Shur, toward Egypt, toward the only home she had ever known before she was taken from it. It was a caravan road, but she was not with a caravan. She was alone on it, which for a woman in that world was very close to a death sentence, and she was pregnant, which made it worse. The land on either side went to scrub and then to stone. The heat came up off the ground in the middle of the day so that the horizon shook. She would have had a skin of water and whatever bread she could carry, and no plan beyond the next mile. And behind her, a household that had not sent anyone after her. Think about that for a moment, because Scripture does not say it out loud, and it is one of the loudest silences in the whole passage. Nobody came looking for her. She walked out of that camp carrying Abram's child, and the camp let her go. There was no search party. There was no one on the road behind her calling her name into the dusk. She was so uncounted that her absence did not even leave a hole. And consider what she was walking toward, because it was not freedom. Egypt was where she had been a slave before she was Abram's household slave. There was no one waiting for her there. no family that would recognize her after all these years, no standing for a woman arriving alone and pregnant. She was not running to something. She was only running away, which is what people do when staying has become unbearable, and there is nothing better on offer anywhere. And she stopped at a spring in the wilderness. That is where the story finds her, sitting by a fountain of water in the middle of nowhere on the road to Shur, in a place with no name that mattered to anyone. She had no future she could see. She had a country behind her that she could not return to as a free woman, and a country ahead of her that she had fled as a slave. She sat down at that water because she could not go any further, and because there was nowhere further to go. And there, in that exact place, the angel of the Lord found her. Do not move past the first thing he said to her, because it is the reason this movement exists. He did not open with instruction. He did not open with rebuke. He opened with her name, Hagar, Sarai's maid. He said her name, and he said where she had come from, and then he asked her where she had come from and where she was going, not because he did not know, but because she needed to hear that someone had asked. In the entire book of Genesis, God calls very few people by name in a direct encounter. Abram, Jacob, Moses later at the bush, and a runaway Egyptian slave girl at a spring in the wilderness, whom no one in the world had bothered to follow. She was so unaccustomed to being seen that she did the thing no one else in all of Scripture does. She gave God a name. Thou, God, seest me. She, the uncounted one, the woman with no standing and no protection, and no one behind her on the road. She is the first human being recorded as naming God, and the name she chose was not about his power or his holiness or his justice. It was about his eyes, because that was what she had met at that spring. Not a lecture, a gaze. And maybe, as you listen to this letter, you are sitting exactly where Hagar sat. At the end of the road you could manage, in a place with no name, certain that no one came after you. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words. And she called the name of the Lord that spake unto her, Thou, God, seest me. For she said, Have I also here looked after him that seeth me? Genesis 16:13, KJV. But now, thus saith the Lord that created thee, O Jacob, and he that formed thee, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed thee, I have called thee by thy name. Thou art mine. Isaiah 43:1, KJV. He telleth the number of the stars, he calleth them all by their names. Psalm 147:4, KJV. Fear not therefore, ye are of more value than many sparrows. Matthew 10:31, KJV. And he calleth his own sheep by name, and leadeth them out. John 10:3, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Look at what he said to Hagar before he said anything else, and then look at what he says to you. I have called thee by thy name, thou art mine. Not I have called out to the crowd, and you happen to be standing in it. Not I have made a general offer, and you accepted the terms. By thy name. The God who tells the number of the stars and calls every one of them by a name that no human astronomer has ever heard, did not run out of attention somewhere between the stars and your chair. He never has to look you up. He has never once had to be reminded. And notice where the shepherd's voice goes in that last verse. He calleth his own sheep by name, and leadeth them out. The naming comes first, and the leading comes after. He does not lead you somewhere, and then figure out who you are when you arrive. He knows you first. He calls you by the name that is yours, and only then does the road begin. Every step you have taken through this long life, even the ones you took in the dark, even the ones you were sure you were taking alone, you were being led out by someone who had already said your name. And there is one more thing in Hagar's story that should not be passed over. God did not take her out of the difficulty. He sent her back to the household she had fled, back to Sarai, back into a hard situation with a promise attached to it. Being seen did not remove her circumstances. It changed what she was carrying inside them. She went back down that road with a name for God that no one before her had ever spoken, and that was enough to make the same house survivable. So carry that back into the chair with you. The next time a letter comes to your door, addressed to occupant, or someone asks you to spell a name you have carried your whole life, let it remind you rather than wound you. There is a place where your name has never needed spelling. There is one who has never once had to ask who you are, who has known it since before the foundation of the world, and who said it out loud at a spring in the wilderness to a woman everyone else had let go. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. If letters like this one find you where you actually live, in the real quiet, in the real ache, in the chair, then let this family keep bringing them to you. There's a small button below that says subscribe. One tap and it is done. It costs you nothing, and it means the next letter will not have to search for you. It will simply arrive, the way a letter arrives at a door left unlatched. Think of it as leaving the porch light on, so that what was written for you can find its way home. And before we go on together, leave one small mark below. Write your first name in the comments, and let it stand as a signature at the bottom of this letter. Not for me. For the next tired soul who scrolls down and needs to know that someone else is in a chair somewhere, listening to the same words, holding on the same way they are. Now, back to the letter. The Father is not finished with you yet. Engraved where he cannot look away. There is a fear underneath the fear, and I want to speak to it plainly now, because I think it is the one that has never been said out loud. It is not really that you believe God has forgotten you. If someone asked you directly, in daylight, you would say, of course not. He is God. He does not forget. You have believed that your whole life, and you believe it still. The fear is quieter and more corrosive than that. It is the fear that you have become a name on a very long list, that he knows you the way a government knows you, accurately, completely, and without warmth, that you are on file, that he could produce your name if required, but that nothing in him leans toward you when it is spoken. That fear does its worst work in the ordinary hours. You pray, and the words are right, and you have been saying words like them for 60 years, and somewhere in the middle of them, a small voice suggests that you are filing a form, that this is a large system, and you are a small entry in it, and the entry is accurate, and that is all. You do not say this to anyone. You would be embarrassed too. It sounds ungrateful, and you are not an ungrateful person. You have counted your blessings honestly all your life, but there it is, in the quiet, and it makes the praying heavy. It shows itself in small ways you would never report to anyone. You catch yourself qualifying your requests before you make them. Lord, if it is not too much, if there are not more urgent things. You have begun praying like a person writing to an office rather than a child speaking to a father, and you did not decide to do that. It simply crept in over the years, one careful sentence at a time. You notice that you thank him far more readily than you ask him, and you have told yourself, that is maturity, and some of it is. But some of it is a slow retreat. Somewhere along the way, you stopped believing you were entitled to take up room. I want you to notice something about that fear before we go to Scripture. It is entirely a fear about God's warmth, not about His power. You have never doubted that He is able. You have doubted that He is near, and that is precisely the doubt that God addresses most often, most tenderly, and most physically in all of His Word. He does not answer it with argument. He answers it with His hands. Come with me to a people in exile, because that is where He said it. The people of Judah had been carried away to Babylon, not conquered and left in place, carried, physically removed, walked hundreds of miles across the desert to a city that was not theirs, to live among a language they did not speak. The temple was rubble. The city walls were down. The vessels of the house of God were in a foreign treasury. Everything that had ever told them who they were had been taken apart, stone by stone, and burned. And what they said in that exile is one of the most devastating sentences in the prophets. Zion said, "The Lord hath forsaken me, and my Lord hath forgotten me." That is not the complaint of a people who had stopped believing in God. It is worse than that. They still believed. They simply believed that He had moved on, that the covenant had lapsed, that whatever they had been to Him once, they were no longer, and the evidence was all around them in a foreign city and a ruined home. Picture what they had to look at every day. Babylon was not a poor city. It was the wonder of the ancient world. Walls so wide that chariots could pass on top of them. Gardens rising in terraces. Processional avenues glazed in blue tile with lions walking along them in gold. The exiles lived in the shadow of a magnificence built entirely by the people who had destroyed their home, and they had to walk past the temples of Marduk to get water. Everything in that skyline said the same thing to them every single day. Your God was not strong enough, and you were not important enough. And this is what the winners look like. And they had no way of knowing how long it would last. That is the part we forget. Reading it now with the ending in our hands. They were told 70 years, and 70 years is a life. It meant that most of the adults who walked out of Jerusalem in chains would never walk back in. They would raise children in Babylon who had never seen the temple, who would learn about the courts and the altar the way your grandchildren learn about a country they have never visited. Their grandchildren would speak Aramaic and know Babylonian street names, and the songs of Zion would become something the old people sang. That is what exile does. It does not only take your home, it takes the certainty that your home has anything to do with your future. And so, they stopped singing. By the waters of Babylon they hung their harps in the willow trees, because the people who had conquered them asked for a song of Zion as entertainment, and there is no answer to that. A whole generation carried an instrument they could not bring themselves to play. It was into that, into a people looking at gold lions on a wall and grieving a burned temple, that God spoke the answer. And He did not begin with power. He began with the tenderest picture available in human experience, and then He said that even it was not enough. Can a woman forget her nursing child? Everything in a mother's body argues against it. The ache in her own chest reminds her, before she has time to think. And God says, even that, even she may forget. but I will not forget thee. And then, as if aware that a heart in exile needs more than a comparison, he goes further, and he shows them his hands. Behold, I have graven thee upon the palms of my hands, not written, graven, cut in, carved, engraved into the flesh of the palm, in the one place a person cannot look away from. Your hands are in front of you all day long. You cannot work without seeing them. A thing carved into a palm is a thing seen at every moment, in every task, forever, without effort and without choosing. And you know, as the exiles could not yet have known, where those palms would be pierced, and by what, and for whom. And maybe, as you listen to this letter, you are standing where those exiles stood, in the middle of a life that no longer looks like the one you built, staring at everything that got taken apart, wondering whether you have been quietly written off. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words. But Zion said, The Lord hath forsaken me, and my Lord hath forgotten me. Can a woman forget her sucking child, that she should not have compassion on the son of her womb? Yea, they may forget, yet will I not forget thee. Behold, I have graven thee upon the palms of my hands. Thy walls are continually before me. Isaiah 49:14-16, KJV. Yea, I have loved thee with an everlasting love. Therefore with loving kindness have I drawn thee. Jeremiah 31:3, KJV. For the mountains shall depart, and the hills be removed. But my kindness shall not depart from thee, neither shall the covenant of my peace be removed, saith the Lord that hath mercy on thee. Isaiah 54:10, KJV. I have blotted out, as a thick cloud, thy transgressions, and as a cloud thy sins. Return unto me, for I have redeemed thee. Isaiah 44:22, KJV. The Lord hath appeared of old unto me, saying, Yea, I have loved thee with an everlasting love. Jeremiah 31:3, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Weigh what he actually chose to do with your name, my child, because it answers the fear underneath the fear. He did not file it. He did not enter it into a record that could be consulted when necessary. He cut it into his own hands. A file can be closed and set aside. A scar cannot. He put you in the one place where he would see you without ever having to decide to look. The place his eyes fall 1,000 times a day without effort. The place he cannot use for anything else without seeing you first. And look at what he piles on top of it. Thy walls are continually before me. The exiles were grieving broken walls in a city hundreds of miles away, and God tells them that the ruin they cannot stop thinking about is a ruin he has never stopped thinking about either. The thing that occupies your mind at 3 a.m. is not a thing he has to be told about. It is continually before him. He is not waiting for you to bring it up. Then hear the sighs of the promise underneath all of it. The mountains shall depart, and the hills be removed. He picks the most permanent things a human eye can rest on, the ridgeline that was there before your grandparents and will be there after your grandchildren. And he says that those will go before his kindness toward you goes. You have watched a great many permanent things prove temporary in your life. Houses sold, institutions changed past recognizing, people you were certain would always be there. He knows exactly what that has cost you, and he deliberately names the most solid thing in your landscape in order to tell you it is less solid than his covenant with you. And note where he puts the emphasis in the picture of the nursing mother. He does not merely say she remembers her child. He says she should not have compassion on the son of her womb. The word is about the body, a physical, involuntary turning toward. That is the register in which God is describing his attention to you, not a decision he makes each morning, something nearer to instinct if such a word could be used of him, and stronger than the strongest instinct he could name. So carry this back into the chair with you. When the quiet voice suggests again that you are merely on file, look at your own hands for a moment, at the lines in them, at the work they have done, at the years written across the backs of them, and then remember whose hands have your name carved into the palms, and what it cost to carve it there, and that he has never once needed to look you up. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. The God who knew you before you were, I want to speak now to a heaviness that arrives late in a life and catches people entirely unprepared, because no one warns you about it, and almost no one admits to it. It is the fear that you have not amounted to what you were meant to amount to. It comes quietly, usually in an ordinary moment, sorting through a drawer, or looking at a photograph of yourself at 30, or hearing about what someone else's grandchild has accomplished. And with it comes an accounting you did not ask for. All the things you meant to do, the talent you had and did not use, the years that went into keeping a household running, or a sick person comfortable, or a job going, years that no one will ever write down anywhere. You look at the shape of the life behind you, and it does not look like the life you imagined at the start, and you cannot escape the arithmetic that there is not enough time left to change the total. And underneath that is the harder question, the one you would never say to another living soul. Was there a plan for me at all? Or did I simply happen, one life among billions, in a particular house in a particular year, and everything after that was weather? And it is sharpened by comparison, which is a thing you know you should not do and do anyway. Someone your age has written a book, or is still working, or has a family that gathers. You hear about it, and you are pleased for them sincerely. And then afterward, alone, the arithmetic starts again. The comparison is unfair in every direction. You know nothing of what their life costs them behind the door, and, knowing that, has never once stopped it from happening. I want to be honest with you here, because you are too old to be handled. That question cannot be answered by looking at your accomplishments. If you measure a life by what it produced that the world noticed, almost every life ever lived comes up short, including nearly every life in Scripture. It can only be answered by going back further than your achievements, back further than your choices, back further than your birth, to a place where the only thing in existence was God and His intention. So come with me to a young man in Anathoth, who was handed a life he did not want, and told when it had been decided. Jeremiah was young. He says so himself, and the word he uses suggests he was barely more than a boy. He was from a priestly family in a small town a few miles from Jerusalem, and the world he lived in was collapsing in slow motion. Assyria was fading, Babylon was rising, and Judah was caught between them, playing at politics and worshiping at every altar that promised protection. Into that, God called a boy from Anathoth to spend his entire adult life saying things nobody wanted to hear. And Jeremiah's first response is the response of every honest person who has ever been asked for more than they had. Ah, Lord God, behold, I cannot speak, for I am a child. It is not false modesty. It is a real assessment of a real inadequacy. He was young, he had no standing, and the message he was being handed would make him hated in his own hometown. And it did. His neighbors plotted against him. His family turned. He was beaten and put in the stocks, dropped into a cistern and left in the mud, and he lived to see the city he had warned burn exactly as he had said it would. By every measure the world uses, Jeremiah's ministry was a failure. Nobody listened. Nothing was averted. But look at what God said to him before any of it began. Before I formed thee in the belly I knew thee, and before thou camest forth out of the womb I sanctified thee. Not I have looked at your qualifications and found them adequate. Not I have chosen you because of what you will accomplish, because in worldly terms he would accomplish nothing at all. Before I formed thee, I knew thee. The knowing came before the forming. Before there were hands to be made, or a voice to be given, or a single choice to be taken, God knew him. Not knew about him, knew him. That is the ground beneath a human life, and it is not made of accomplishment. Jeremiah's worth was settled in the mind of God before Jeremiah existed to earn or lose it, and nothing that happened in 40 years of rejection ever moved it by a hair. And maybe, as you listen to this letter, you are standing where Jeremiah stood in that first moment, holding up your inadequacy like an argument, certain that the accounting of your life does not come out in your favor. And this is what the Father says to you, in His own words, "Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee, and before thou camest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee, and I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations." Jeremiah 1:5, KJV. "For thou hast possessed my reins. Thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise thee. For I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well." Psalm 139:13, 14, KJV. "Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect. And in thy book all my members were written, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them." Psalm 139:16, KJV. "According as he hath chosen us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and without blame before him in love." Ephesians 1:4, KJV. "O Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. Thou knowest my downsitting and mine uprising. Thou understandest my thought afar off." Psalm 139:1-2, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Look carefully at the order of things in what he said to Jeremiah, because the order is the whole comfort. New, then formed. Sanctified, then born. Every single thing you have ever been afraid was the basis of your worth, your usefulness, your strength, your ability to hold a family together, your capacity to still be needed. Every one of those came afterward. They arrived on top of a worth that was already finished before you drew breath, which means that as those things have thinned with the years, as your usefulness has changed shape and your strength has gone quieter, not one thing has happened to the ground you actually stand on. It was never load-bearing, all that doing. It was decoration on a foundation laid before the world began. And hear the astonishing thing the psalmist says about the days of your life. "In thy book all my members were written, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them." There was a book about you before there was a you, not a record kept afterward, tallying results. A book written in advance, in the hand of God, at a time when nothing of you existed to be observed. You have spent a great deal of time lately looking backward at your life and finding it wanting. He looked forward at it before it started and called it his work. Then notice where he says, his knowing reaches. Thou knowest my down-sitting and mine uprising, not the great moments, the sitting down and the getting up, the smallest, most repeated, least remarkable motions of an ordinary day, the ones that have got harder for you lately, and that nobody sees. That is the resolution at which he knows you, not the summary of your life. The motion of your body settling into a chair, this very moment, watched by the God who wrote the book. So carry this back with you. When the accounting starts again and the drawer full of unfinished things accuses you, answer it with the order God himself established. Before I formed thee, I knew thee. Your worth was never the sum at the bottom of the page. It was the first line, written before the page existed, in a hand that does not revise. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. The name he gave you in place of the one you earned. There is something you have been carrying that has nothing to do with loneliness, and I want to bring it into the light now, because I think it has been sitting in you longer than any other thing in this letter, and it does not weaken with time the way other memories do. That is the strange thing about it. You cannot recall what you did last Tuesday, but you can recall that room, and the light in it, and the exact words, and how your face felt. 50 years of ordinary days have thinned to almost nothing, and that has not thinned at all. Memory keeps the sharp things longest, which feels like a design flaw, and you have never been able to do anything about it. It is a name you gave yourself. Not the one on your birth certificate, the other one, the one made out of the worst thing you ever did, or the worst season you ever had, or the way somebody described you once in anger, and you have never quite been able to put it down. Everyone has one. Yours might be a word somebody said to you when you were 7. It might be the name of a failure that nobody else remembers, and you have never forgotten. It might be the shape of a marriage that ended, or a child you could not reach, or a stretch of years when you were not the person you meant to be, and the people closest to you paid for it. And here is what that name does. It sits underneath everything else and makes the good things feel like a misunderstanding. You are told you are kind, and some part of you thinks they do not know. You are thanked for something, and a voice says, if they saw the whole record. You have been forgiven by God. You believe that. You have believed it for decades, and still the old name answers first when your heart asks who you are. You have made peace with the idea that God pardons you. What you have not been able to believe is that he would rename you. And it has a particular habit. It waits for the good moments. It rarely troubles you when things are hard. When things are hard, you are too occupied to hear it. It comes when something lovely happens. A grandchild's arms around your neck. A morning when you feel well. A moment of unexpected peace in a service. And right there, in the middle of the good thing, the old name leans in and suggests that you of all people have no business receiving this. It has robbed you of more good hours than any grief ever did. I want to take you to a fire in a courtyard, because the man standing at it had just finished earning the worst name of his life, and understand what the hours before it had done to him. He had eaten a meal at which the man he loved had said that one of them would betray him. He had been told to his face that he himself would deny it, and had contradicted it in front of everyone. He had gone to a garden and been asked to stay awake, and had not managed it 3 times, and had been found each time. He had woken to torches coming through the trees, and had swung a sword at a servant's head in a panic, and been told to put it away. Everything he had tried that night had failed in a different direction, and by the time he reached that courtyard, he was a man with nothing left of his own competence. Peter had said he would not. That is the part that makes it unbearable. He had not been quiet about it. He had made a declaration in front of everyone. Though all men shall be offended because of thee, yet will I never be offended. And within hours he was standing at a charcoal fire in the courtyard of the high priest, warming his hands, because the night was cold, and he had followed at a distance, which was already the beginning of it. A servant girl looked at him in the firelight. That is all it took. Not a soldier, not a magistrate. A girl who worked at the door said, "Thou also wast with Jesus of Galilee." And he said, "I know not what thou sayest." Then another. Then the group, hearing his accent, because a Galilean could not hide his mouth in Jerusalem. And the 3rd time he did not merely deny it. He began to curse and to swear, saying, "I know not the man." And the cock crew. There is one line in that scene that has undone people for 2,000 years, and it is not what Peter said. It is what happened next. The Lord turned and looked upon Peter. He was being tried. He was surrounded and beaten, and hours from the cross, and in the middle of it he turned his head and found the face of the man who had just sworn he had never met him. And Peter went out and wept bitterly. Now hold that man in your mind and follow him forward, past the crucifixion, past the tomb, to a beach in Galilee at the very beginning of a day. 7 of them had gone back to fishing, because that is what you do when you do not know what else to do. They caught nothing all night, and a figure on the shore called out to them and told them where to cast, and the net came up so full they could not draw it. And John said, "It is the Lord." Peter went into the water. He did not wait for the boat. And when they got to shore, there was a fire of coals already burning, with fish on it and bread. Charcoal, the same word in the Greek as the fire in that courtyard. The only other place in the entire Gospel of John it appears. Peter walked up out of the sea and smelled the exact smell of the worst night of his life. And Jesus did not mention the denial. He asked one question, 3 times once for each denial, and every one of them was some version of, "Do you love me?" And then he handed him the church. But look at what he called him. Not once in that entire exchange does he use the name Peter, the rock, the name he had given him. He says, "Simon, son of Jonas." He goes all the way back to the man's oldest name, the one he had before any of this, before the promises and the failure, and he rebuilds from there. And he gives him work. Feed my sheep. The man who denied him 3 times before a servant girl is handed the flock. And maybe, as you listen to this letter, you are standing where Simon stood on that shore, smelling the smoke of the thing you did, certain that whatever your name was before, it is not that anymore. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words, "And I say also unto thee, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Matthew 16:18, KJV. "To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the hidden manna, and will give him a white stone, and in the stone a new name written, which no man knoweth saving he that receiveth it." Revelation 2:17 KJV. Thou shalt no more be termed forsaken, neither shall thy land any more be termed desolate, but thou shalt be called Hephzibah, and thy land Beulah, for the Lord delighteth in thee. Isaiah 62:4 KJV. Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. 2 Corinthians 5:17 KJV. As far as the east is from the west, so far hath he removed our transgressions from us. Psalm 103:12 KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Look at the naming God does in Isaiah, because it is precise, and he does not merely soften the old name. He replaces it. Thou shalt no more be termed forsaken. He names the exact word the people had been calling themselves, forsaken, desolate, and he does not argue with their history. He does not say it was never that bad. He says you will not be called that anymore, and here is what you will be called instead. Hephzibah. My delight is in her. That is what the name means. He took the word forsaken out of their mouths and put in its place a name that is nothing but his own pleasure in them. And weigh the strangest promise in that list, the white stone with a new name written on it, which no man knoweth saving he that receiveth it, a name only you and he will ever know. Not a public reputation. You have one of those, and it is partly wrong in both directions. A private name given by God, known to no one else on earth, which means that whatever anyone has ever called you, including yourself, there is a name being kept for you that no human tongue has ever mispronounced or spoiled. Then, look at the distance he chose in the psalm, because he chose it carefully, as far as the east is from the west, not north from south. North and south have poles, and the distance between them is a number you can write down. East and west have no end. Travel east forever, and you never once begin going west. He picked the one measurement in creation that has no total, and that is where he put the thing you cannot stop rehearsing. And notice one more thing about that beach. Jesus had made breakfast. Before any conversation, before the 3 questions, before the commission, he had lit a fire and cooked fish and had bread ready for 7 tired men who had been out all night. The restoration of Peter began with a meal he had prepared with his own hands for the man who had denied him. That is the order he works in, and it has not changed. So carry that back into the chair. When the old name answers first again, and it will, because it has had a long time to learn its way to the front, do not argue with it out of your own record. You will lose. Answer it with his renaming instead. Thou shalt no more be termed forsaken. He knows the whole account. He was there for all of it, and he has already chosen what to call you. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. When no one remembers what you carried. Now I want to speak to something that almost never gets named out loud, and it may be the loneliest thing in this whole letter. And it is not that anybody meant to lose it. Records simply do not get kept of that kind of work. There is no institution that holds it, no colleague who could confirm it, no document anywhere in the world with your name on it that says what those years contained. It is not that you are forgotten. It is that what you did is forgotten. There is a difference, and it is sharp. And you were not thanked at the time either, mostly because the people you were carrying were in no condition to thank you. That is the nature of it. The ones who need carrying are, almost by definition, unable to notice that they are being carried. You did not resent that then, and you do not resent it now. But it does mean that there was never a moment, not one in all those years, when anyone stood in the doorway and said, "I see what you are doing here, and I know what it is costing you. You gave years to something. Perhaps you nursed a husband or a wife through a long illness, and you know what that actually cost. The broken nights, the lifting, the medications ordered and reordered, the way you learned to read a face for pain, the slow disappearance of everything your own life used to contain. Perhaps you raised children mostly alone, and the arithmetic of that has never been done by anyone but you. Perhaps you held a family together across a crisis that the family itself no longer discusses, or kept a business running through years that would have broken it, or looked after a parent until the very end while everyone else visited. And then it was over, and life closed over it like water. The people you carried are gone, or grown, or moved on, and they do not know, genuinely do not know, not out of unkindness, what those years took out of you. There is no record. There is no reference anyone will ever check. The most significant work of your entire life was done in rooms nobody else was in, and when you are gone, the last person who knows it happened will be gone too. That thought can sit on a person very heavily. Not bitterness. I do not think you are bitter, and I am not going to accuse you of it. Something quieter. The sense of having poured a whole life into a vessel with no bottom, and watching it drain away into a world that never registered the pouring. And there is a further turn of it that catches people off guard. Sometimes the ones you carried do remember, but they remember it wrong, as a simpler thing than it was, a thing you did easily because you were the sort of person who does such things. Nobody ever asks what it cost. Nobody ever says, "What did you give up in those years that you have never mentioned?" And you would not tell them if they asked, because you did not do it in order to be thanked, and you are not about to start collecting now. But the not being asked has its own particular weight, and you have carried that too. Let me take you to a woman standing in the treasury of the temple, because Jesus watched her do exactly that, and He is the entire reason we know she existed. And understand what a widow was in that economy, because it explains what she did. She had no means of earning. She had no legal standing to speak of. Whatever she had came from the goodwill of family, if she had any left, or from the charity of the community, which was uneven. Jesus had said only moments before this scene that the scribes devour widows' houses, meaning that the religious establishment in that very building had a practice of taking from women exactly like her. She walked into a system that had been living off people in her position, and she gave it everything she had. The court of the women in Herod's temple had 13 collection chests along the wall, shaped like trumpets, made of bronze. It was a public place and a loud one. Coins thrown into a bronze horn make a considerable noise, and the rich, Mark says, cast in much. You would have heard them coming. There was a whole small theater to it. The ring of metal on metal, the pause, the crowd registering the amount by sound alone, and Jesus sat over against the treasury and watched. That is the detail. He was not passing through. He sat down, deliberately, opposite the chests, and beheld how the people cast money into the treasury. He was watching the giving, which nobody else in that court was doing in that way. The others were listening for the amounts. He was watching the givers. And a poor widow came, and threw in 2 mites. A mite was the smallest coin in circulation, worth about a 64th of a day's wage. 2 of them together made a farthing. It would have made almost no sound at all in that bronze horn, a small tap, lost entirely under the noise of everything else. Not one person in that court turned around. There was nothing to turn around for. She had, Jesus said, cast in all that she had, even all her living. Everything, not a generous portion of her surplus, the whole of what stood between her and the next day. And she walked out of that temple into a life that was about to be harder than it had been that morning, and nobody in Jerusalem knew what had just happened. Except he did. He called his disciples to him. He interrupted them. He made them stop and look. And he told them that she had put in more than all the rest of them together. And because he said it, and because someone wrote it down, a woman whose name we do not know and whose gift was too small to hear, has been remembered for 2,000 years in every language on earth. Notice what that means. The sound of her giving was inaudible to everyone in that court. It was not inaudible to God. He was seated opposite, watching, and the thing nobody heard is the only thing from that day that anyone now remembers. And maybe, as you listen to this letter, you are standing where she stood, having given all your living into something that made no sound at all. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words. And he called unto him his disciples, and saith unto them, Verily I say unto you, that this poor widow hath cast more in, than all they which have cast into the treasury. For all they did cast in of their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living. Mark 12:43-44, KJV. For God is not unrighteous to forget your work and labor of love, which ye have showed toward his name, in that ye have ministered to the saints, and do minister. Hebrews 6:10, KJV. But when thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret himself shall reward thee openly. Matthew 6:3-4, KJV. Thou tellest my wanderings. Put thou my tears into thy bottle. Are they not in thy book? Psalm 56:8, KJV. And whosoever shall give to drink unto one of these little ones a cup of cold water, only in the name of a disciple, verily I say unto you, he shall in no wise lose his reward. Matthew 10:42, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Hear the sentence in Hebrews exactly as it is built, because the writer chose a strange and deliberate way to say it. God is not unrighteous to forget your work. He does not say God is kind enough to remember. He says forgetting it would be unrighteous. It would be a wrong, a violation of who God is. Your years of unwitnessed labor are not held in his memory as a favor to you. They are held there because he could not forget them and still be himself. That is how firmly the record stands. And look at what he says the reward for secret things actually is. Thy Father, which seeth in secret himself, shall reward thee openly. The seeing in secret is not the end of it. There is an opening coming. A day when the accounting that was never done on earth is done out loud, in front of everyone, by the only witness who was in the room. Every night you were awake, with someone who no longer remembers being ill. Every meal cooked for a table that has since emptied. Every difficult thing you did quietly, rather than let a family break. Seen in secret, rewarded openly. Then take the smallest promise on that list, because it is the one for the days that felt like nothing, a cup of cold water. It is the least significant act of kindness the ancient world could imagine. No cost, no skill, no sacrifice. The thing anyone would do for anyone. And he says it will in no wise lose its reward. If the cup of water is on the record, then so is every unremarkable, repetitive, invisible kindness of the last 50 years of your life, every one of which was larger than a cup of water. And there is something in that scene worth keeping. She gave in a building that was corrupt to a system Jesus had just finished condemning, and he did not deduct a thing from her account for it. Her gift was not diminished by the unworthiness of what received it. Neither is yours. Whatever you poured yourself into, a family that did not handle it well, an institution that let you down, people who could not receive it properly. The giving stands on its own before God, entirely independent of what became of it. So carry this back into your chair. When it rises up again, the sense that the most important work you ever did left no trace. Remember the sound 2 mites make in a bronze trumpet, which is almost nothing, and who was sitting opposite, and how long the world has now remembered a woman nobody in that court even turned to look at. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you, the one who knows what you cannot say. I want to speak now about prayer, and specifically about the kind of prayer you have not been able to pray, because there comes a point in a long life of faith when the words stop working. Not faith, the words. You sit down to pray the way you have sat down to pray for 50 years, and you find there is nothing in you to say. Or there is far too much, and it will not go into sentences. The grief is too large and oddly shaped. The worry about your child is something you cannot even state clearly, because it is made of 20 years of small things. You end up saying, Lord, and then nothing, and then getting up. And then comes the second wound, which is worse than the first. The suspicion that this means something about you, that real believers do not run out of words, that the dryness is evidence, that you have let something go slack, or that the closeness you had in earlier years has been withdrawn as a judgment on how you have handled it. So you feel unable to pray, and then you feel guilty about being unable. And the guilt makes it harder still, and the whole thing tightens like a knot you cannot get your fingers into. And there is an added difficulty when the thing you cannot say is not sorrow, but anger, because that happens, and almost nobody admits it. There are prayers you have not prayed because of what was in them, real anger at how something turned out, at someone who is not here to answer for it, sometimes at God Himself for the part you cannot make sense of. And a lifetime of reverence has taught you that such things are not brought into His presence, so you have held them outside the door and prayed around them, and the praying has felt thin because the largest thing in you was not in it. I want to say something to that with some force, because it matters. Wordlessness in prayer is not the failure of prayer. In Scripture, it is very often the location of the deepest praying that ever happens, and there is a specific provision made for exactly the state you are in. And it is one of the most extraordinary things in all of Paul's writing, and I do not think it has ever been read slowly enough to you. But first, come to a woman standing at the door of the tabernacle at Shiloh, praying with no words at all. And it is worth saying plainly what that meant in that world, because we soften it now. A woman's security in old age was her sons. Her standing in the community was her children. Her share in the future of her people, in the promise itself, which passed down through generations, ran through a child she did not have. So it was not only grief, it was exposure and shame, and a kind of exile carried out in the middle of her own family, at the same table, at every meal. Hannah could not have children. In that world, that was not a private sorrow. It was a public status, and she carried it in front of everyone. Her husband loved her. Elkanah is one of the gentler husbands in Scripture, and his line to her, "Am not I better to thee than 10 sons?" is meant kindly, even if it lands badly. But there was another wife in that house, Peninnah, who had children, and who provoked her sore, for to make her fret. Year after year, every time they went up to worship. Scripture says she did it yearly. This was not one cruel remark. It was an annual custom of cruelty, and Hannah wept and did not eat. And one year she got up after the meal and went to the house of the Lord by herself. Eli the priest was sitting on a seat by a post of the temple, and Hannah prayed, in bitterness of soul, the text says, and she wept sore. But look at how she prayed. She spake in her heart. Only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. No words came out. Her mouth was moving, and there was no sound, because what was in her would not become speech. And Eli, the priest of Israel, the professional in the matter of prayer, watched her do it, and concluded she was drunk. He rebuked her for it. The one human being present whose entire calling was to recognize prayer when he saw it, looked directly at the truest praying in that whole building and misread it completely. She answered him with great dignity, "I am a woman of a sorrowful spirit. I have poured out my soul before the Lord." And Eli, to his credit, blessed her and sent her away in peace. And Scripture says her countenance was no more sad, before anything at all had changed in her circumstances. She had not yet been given anything. She had simply, at last, poured out what she could not say, and been heard. Nobody in that building understood what she was doing. God did not require her to explain it. And maybe, as you listen to this letter, you are standing where Hannah stood at that post, lips moving, no voice, carrying something that will not go into sentences and being misread by everyone who sees you. And this is what the Father says to you, in His own words. Now, Hannah, she spake in her heart. Only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore, Eli thought she had been drunken. 1 Samuel 1-13, KJV. Likewise, the Spirit also helpeth our infirmities, for we know not what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit itself maketh intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. Romans 8:26, KJV. And he that searcheth the hearts knoweth what is the mind of the Spirit, because he maketh intercession for the saints according to the will of God. Romans 8:27, KJV. For your Father knoweth what things ye have need of before ye ask him. Matthew 6:8, KJV. O Lord, thou hast searched me, and known me. For there is not a word in my tongue, but, lo, O Lord, thou knowest it altogether. Psalm 139:1-4, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Read the verse in Romans again slowly, because there is a provision in it made specifically for the condition you are in. we know not what we should pray for as we ought. That is not written about weak Christians or lapsed ones. That is Paul, writing about all of us, stating as a settled fact that we do not know how to pray properly. And rather than correcting the problem by teaching better technique, God answers it by praying for you himself. The Spirit maketh intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. The very wordlessness you have been treating as evidence against you turns out to be the exact form of the intercession God has already provided. And notice how it is understood on the other end. He that searcheth the hearts knoweth what is the mind of the Spirit. There is no translation problem. Nothing is lost between the groan you cannot articulate and the Father who receives it. You have spent a long time feeling that you cannot make yourself understood. To your family, to your doctor, sometimes even to yourself. In the one place where it matters most, there is no such difficulty. The searching of hearts is not a technique God uses on you. It is simply what he does. Then hear the sentence that removes the last of the pressure. Your Father knoweth what things ye have need of, before ye ask him. Prayer was never the means of informing him. You have been sitting in that chair, feeling that you failed to deliver a message. There was no undelivered message. He knew before you sat down. He knew before the trouble began. And the reason to speak to him was never that he required a briefing. It was that a child gets to say things to a father, whether or not the father already knows. And look at what Hannah did after she was heard. She got up and ate, and her face changed, and nothing whatsoever had altered in her circumstances yet. The child was not conceived that day. She had been given no sign and no answer. What she had been given was the experience of having finally set the thing down in front of God, and it turned out that was sufficient to change her face before it changed her life. So carry that with you. The next time you sit down to pray and nothing comes, do not get up in shame. Sit there with your lips moving and no voice, exactly like Hannah at the post, and know that the silence is not empty, that there are groanings which cannot be uttered rising out of you in a language God speaks natively, and that he is not, unlike Eli, misreading you. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. The promise that does not age. Let me speak now to something you have been noticing, and probably not mentioning, because there is no good way to bring it up. Your body has changed the terms. Things that were nothing are now something. The stairs are a decision. The jar does not open. You plan your outings around where you can sit. You have started saying, "I used to," more often than you would like. And every time you say it, there's a small cost you do not show on your face. And behind all of it, the mathematics that nobody says out loud. There is less ahead than behind, and the ratio is not improving. What that does to a believing heart is subtle and unkind. It does not usually attack your faith directly. It attacks your sense of being still in the game, because so much of what you understood about serving God involved doing, showing up, helping, driving someone, cooking for someone, teaching, working, being useful. And as the doing has narrowed, a quiet suspicion has moved in behind it, that you have been honorably discharged, that God's active dealings with you are essentially concluded, and what remains is a waiting period, and he is being kind about it, but there is nothing further required. It shows itself in the small negotiations you now have with your own day. You decide not to go to the thing because of the parking, or the standing, or because you would need someone to bring you, and you have decided not to ask. Each individual decision is sensible. Taken together over a few years, they have quietly reduced the size of your life, and nobody made that decision on purpose, and there is no one to appeal to about it. And then there's the harder version, the one that visits during a service. Everyone around you is being called to something, to go, to give, to serve, to reach someone. And you sit there doing the arithmetic of what you could actually manage now, and it comes to very little. And you feel yourself listening to an announcement addressed to other people. You are glad for them. You mean that, but you leave a little emptier than you came, and you have never said so. I want to take that suspicion apart, because Scripture takes it apart, and it does so with a very old man in a temple who had been waiting his entire life for one thing. And consider the ordinary years that promise had to survive. He had watched Roman soldiers in the courts of that temple. He had lived under Herod, who had rebuilt the place magnificently and murdered his own sons. He had presumably heard every rumor of every claimant that came through Judea in those decades, and gone to look and come home. There is no record of God speaking to him again in all that time. One promise given once, and then years of ordinary temple days, and no confirmation that any of it was still in force. Simeon was just and devout and old. That is nearly all we are told about his circumstances, and it is enough. He had been given a promise, that he would not see death before he had seen the Lord's Christ. Think about what it is to live with a promise like that for years and years. Every day you are not dead is a day the promise is still outstanding. Every day you are older, and the promise has not come, and you have no way of knowing whether it is next week or another decade. He had watched the temple courts fill and empty for decades. He had seen countless families come up with their firstborn sons to perform the redemption of the firstborn. 5 shekels paid to the priests, a small, constant, ordinary traffic of ordinary people. Nothing in that traffic had ever been the thing he was waiting for. And on one particular day, the Spirit moved him to go into the temple, and a young couple came in with a baby. They were poor. You can tell from the offering. The law required a lamb, but made provision for those who could not afford one. 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. That is what they brought. Birds, the offering of the poor in a country full of poor people, on an ordinary day in a crowd. And this old man crossed the court and took the child out of their arms. Look at what happened in that moment. The entire hope of Israel, every prophecy, every generation of waiting, everything Simeon had held on to through a lifetime of ordinary days in that temple, was suddenly a warm weight in the arms of a very old man who could no longer do much of anything else. His usefulness by any worldly measure was long finished, and the last thing recorded of his life is the most significant recognition in the history of that temple. He said, "Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace, according to thy word. For mine eyes have seen thy salvation." Then look at who was standing right there beside him. Anna, a prophetess, and Luke does not spare us the arithmetic. She had lived with a husband 7 years, and had been a widow of about 84 years. She was very old. She departed not from the temple, but served God with fastings and prayers night and day. 84 years of widowhood spent praying in that building, and no record of a single word she said in all that time, until that hour when she came in and gave thanks and spake of him to all them that looked for redemption in Jerusalem. The two people God chose as the first witnesses to his Son in the temple were both far past the age of usefulness. That was not incidental. That was the arrangement. And maybe, as you listen to this letter, you are standing where Simeon stood, at the very end of your strength, holding a promise you have carried far longer than you expected to carry it. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words. And even to your old age I am he, and even to hoar hairs will I carry you. I have made, and I will bear. Even I will carry, and will deliver you. Isaiah 46:4, KJV. Those that be planted in the house of the Lord shall flourish in the courts of our God. They shall still bring forth fruit in old age. They shall be fat and flourishing. Psalm 92:13-14, KJV. For which cause we faint not. But though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. 2 Corinthians 4:16, KJV. Cast me not off in the time of old age. Forsake me not when my strength faileth. Now also when I am old and grey-headed, O God, forsake me not. Psalm 71:9-18, KJV. They shall bring forth fruit in old age, to show that the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no unrighteousness in him. Psalm 92:14-15, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Weigh the promise in Isaiah word by word, because God builds it deliberately toward one verb, and then repeats that verb until it cannot be missed. I have made, and I will bear. Even I will carry, and will deliver you. 4 verbs, and 3 of them are about him doing the work. And notice the timing he attaches to it. Even to your old age, even to hoar hairs, gray hair, named specifically, as though he knew a day would come when you would look in a mirror and quietly wonder if the arrangement still stood. It stands. He states it in exactly the season you feared it might lapse. And there is something in the shape of that promise you should not miss. He does not say, I will restore your strength so that you can carry on. He says, I will carry. The relationship changes as you age, but it changes in the direction of being held more, not less. You spent decades carrying children, households, other people's crises, whole years of other people's needs. The transition you have been mourning is not a demotion. It is the point at which you stop being the one who carries and become the one who is carried, which is what you were always meant to be, and which he has been waiting a long time to do without you struggling against it. Then, hear the Psalm's strange agricultural claim. They shall still bring forth fruit in old age. Not, they shall be pleasantly remembered for their earlier fruit. Still bring forth, present, ongoing, now. An old olive tree in that country produces after the young ones have failed. The oldest trees give the best oil. There is fruit that only comes from age, and it is not the visible kind, and you may be producing it right now in the chair without knowing it. Simeon's whole life came to its purpose in a room where all he did was hold something and speak. And there is a detail in Anna's story that answers something. Luke does not record one word of her 84 years of prayer. Not one. All those decades in that building, night and day, and the content is simply not preserved. But the effect is, she was there and awake, and ready on the one morning it mattered, and she recognized him instantly. Nobody has any record of what she prayed. God had all of it. So carry this back with you. When the stairs remind you again of the arithmetic, answer them with his verb. I will carry. He said it about gray hair specifically. He has never once discharged anyone. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say. To you. The house that went quiet. I want to speak now carefully about the silence in your house. Not the silence of God. We have been through that. The other one. The silence of a room where a voice used to be. If you have lost your husband or your wife, you know precisely what I mean, and there is nothing I could say that would surprise you. But it belongs to other losses too. A house where the children were and are not. A town emptied of everyone you started with. A table that seats 6 and holds 1. What surprises people about grief in a long life is not the pain. Everyone expects the pain. What surprises them is the administration of it. The fact that the person is gone and the mail keeps coming. That you must ring companies and explain that the world requires you to be competent about the worst thing that has ever happened to you. And then, later, the second surprise, that everyone else's grief has a horizon, and yours does not. There is a season of casseroles and calls, and then it ends, quite naturally, and the world resumes, and you are still standing in a kitchen at the same hour you used to talk to someone. And there is the smallest cruelty of all, which is that you have begun to lose the sound. You can see the face, you have photographs, but the voice thins, and there comes a day when you cannot summon it exactly. And that feels like a second losing, and you cannot tell anyone because it sounds like a failure of love. And the practical shape of it is its own quiet trouble. You cook too much, still, after all this time, because your hands learned a quantity years ago and have not been retrained. You start a sentence out loud in an empty room. You hear something on the news you would have turned to say something about, and the turning still happens before you catch it. You keep a chair the way it was. You have not moved certain things, and you are not sure whether that is love or fear, and you have decided not to examine it too closely. And the calendar keeps its own record without asking you. There are dates in the year that arrive with weight, and everyone else walks through them as ordinary Tuesdays. You have learned to brace for them a week in advance, and to say nothing about it afterward. I am not going to tell you that this passes. You have lived long enough to know when you are being managed. What I am going to tell you is that there is a scene in the Gospels where God stood in front of exactly this and did something nobody expected, and the sisters knew exactly what he could do. That is what makes their message so restrained and so devastating. They did not ask him to come. They sent 4 words. Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. They named the relationship and the trouble and left the rest to him, because that is what you do with someone you trust completely. They had watched him heal strangers. They had housed him. Martha had cooked for him. There was no version of this they could have imagined in which he simply did not come. Bethany was 2 miles from Jerusalem, an afternoon's walk. Lazarus was sick, and his sisters sent word, and Jesus did not come. He stayed 2 more days where he was. By the time he arrived, Lazarus had been in the tomb 4 days, which in that culture mattered. There was a belief that the soul lingered near the body 3 days, so 4 days meant it was finished. Absolutely, unambiguously over. Martha met him on the road and said the sentence every grieving person has said in some form, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. Not an accusation. Something worse, a statement of fact with a wound inside it. Then Mary came and fell at his feet and said the identical words. and this time something changed in him. He groaned in the spirit and was troubled. The Greek is stronger than English lets it be. It carries anger, a kind of snorting fury. He was not merely sad. He was enraged at what death does. And then Jesus wept. 2 words, the shortest verse in the English Bible, and easily the most astonishing. He was minutes away from calling Lazarus out of that tomb. He knew exactly what was about to happen. He knew the grief was temporary in the most literal sense possible. It would be over before the afternoon ended, and he wept anyway. He did not tell them not to cry because the situation was about to be resolved. He did not point out that their grief was, technically, unnecessary. He stood in front of a grave with people he loved and he cried with them, and only afterward did he do anything about it. The tears came first. God stood in a cemetery and had a human reaction to a human loss, and it is written down forever so that no grieving person could ever again believe that their tears are a failure of faith. And the Jews standing there said, "Behold how he loved him." They were right. And maybe, as you listen to this letter, you are standing where Mary stood at those feet, with 2 miles of what if behind you, and a sentence you have said 1,000 times in your own kitchen. And this is what the Father says to you. In his own words, Jesus wept. Then said the Jews, "Behold how he loved him." John 11:35-36, KJV. "The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit." Psalm 34:18, KJV. "He healeth the broken in heart, and bindeth up their wounds." Psalm 147:3, KJV. "But I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep, that ye sorrow not even as others which have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also, which sleep in Jesus, will God bring with him." 1 Thessalonians 4:13-14, KJV. "And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away." Revelation 21:4, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Look at what Paul actually says to grieving people, because he does not say what people think he says. He does not say, "Do not sorrow." He says, "Sorrow not even as others which have no hope." The instruction is not to stop grieving. It is to grieve differently, as someone whose grief has a floor under it. Every tear you have cried in that house is permitted. What is not required of you is despair. Those are different things, and the world constantly confuses them, and so do most of the people who have tried to comfort you. And weigh where God says he is located in relation to your broken heart. The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart. Nigh, near, close at hand. The condition you have been treating as distance from him is described by him as the address where he comes closest. You have been reading the ache as evidence that something between you and God has gone slack. He calls it the exact place he draws near. Then hold the promise in Revelation, because it is more specific than we usually let it be. God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. Not there shall be no more tears, that comes after. First, a hand. Someone reaches out and wipes a face. That is not a policy about the future. It is an intimate physical act, done individually, to a person, by God himself. Whatever you have cried, in the quiet of that house, in the stretches when the phone did not ring and there was nobody left to speak to, those tears end that way. Not evaporated, wiped away, by hand, by him. And there is one more detail in Bethany, When Jesus called Lazarus out, he turned to the people standing there and told them to loose him and let him go. He raised the man himself, and then handed the unwrapping to the community. The grave clothes came off in human hands. God does the part only He can do, and then gives the rest to people, which is why the ones who have sat with you in this, however clumsily, were doing something more sacred than they knew. So carry this back into the chair. When the house goes quiet again, and the old sentence rises, if only, if only. Remember that God stood at a grave, knowing the resurrection was 4 minutes away, and cried first. He is not waiting for you to be finished grieving before He is willing to be near you. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say. To you, the waiting that outlasted the waiter. Now let me speak to the thing you have been asking God for so long that you have almost stopped expecting an answer. You know what it is. It has a name, and you have said that name in prayer more times than any other word in your life. A child who does not call, a son or daughter who walked away from the faith you raised them in, and you have watched them build a life with a hole in it, exactly the shape of the thing you cannot give them. A marriage in the family coming apart. Someone drinking. Someone gone silent after words that cannot be unsaid. A grandchild you are not permitted to see. You have prayed about it for years. Decades, maybe. You have prayed it in every way a person can. Pleading, arguing, bargaining, in tears, calmly, in the middle of ordinary tasks, at every hour there is, and nothing has moved, or things have moved in the wrong direction, which is harder. And here is the specific ache I want to name, because it is the one that gets said the least. You are beginning to wonder whether you will live to see it. That is a real fear, and it deserves a real answer rather than a soft one. You are not asking God for something for yourself anymore. You are asking Him for something for someone else, and the question that keeps you awake is whether the answer will come after you are gone, and whether you will ever know. Come with me to a road outside a village, where an old man had been watching the horizon for years. The story is the one you know, but I want you to see it from where the father stood. He had 2 sons. The younger one asked for his inheritance while his father was still alive, which was, in that culture, the equivalent of wishing him dead, said in public, in front of the whole village, and the father gave it to him. He divided the living, sold land that had been in the family for generations, and handed a young man the price of it, and let him walk down the road. That village would have known. Everyone would have known, and the father stayed there, among neighbors who knew exactly what his son had done to him, and he waited. And think about what the waiting cost him in public. Every day he went out to that road. The village watched him do it. A man of standing, going out to look for a boy who had shamed him. It would have been read as weakness. And in that culture, weakness in an elder was not a small thing. There would have been neighbors who thought he should have closed the door for good, who told him so kindly, meaning it as advice. He kept going out anyway, in front of all of them, year after year, and let them think whatever they thought. We do not know how long, long enough for a fortune to be spent and a famine to arrive, and a Jewish boy to end up feeding pigs and envying them their food, long enough for the father to become an old man doing the same thing every day. And here is the line that gives the whole thing away. When he was yet a great way off, his father saw him, and had compassion, and ran, and fell on his neck, and kissed him. A great way off. He saw him at a distance, which means he was looking, which means he had been looking. That is not a man who happened to glance up. That is a man who had gone out to that road so many times that he could recognize a walk at the far edge of sight. Years of scanning a horizon that gave him nothing back every single day for a boy who had publicly wished him dead. And then he ran. Understand what that meant? An elderly man of standing in a Middle Eastern village did not run. It required gathering up his robes and exposing his legs, and it was undignified in a way that would have been remembered. He did it anyway, in front of everyone. And the reason he ran was to reach his son before the village did, to get to him first, and to be seen embracing him so that no one could touch the boy afterward. He did not wait at the house to be approached. He did not require the speech the son had prepared. The boy got about half of it out before the father interrupted him and started calling for a robe and a ring. That father is not an illustration of patient human love. He is a portrait of God, drawn by God, and he is watching a road. And maybe, as you listen to this letter, you are standing where that father stood. At the edge of a road you have walked out to more times than you can count, looking at an empty horizon. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him, and had compassion, and ran, and fell on his neck, and kissed him. Luke 15:20, KJV. The Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some men count slackness, but is longsuffering to usward, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. Peter 3:9, KJV. Thus saith the Lord, Refrain thy voice from weeping, and thine eyes from tears, for thy work shall be rewarded, saith the Lord, and they shall come again from the land of the enemy. And there is hope in thine end, saith the Lord, that thy children shall come again to their own border. Jeremiah 31:16 and 17, KJV. So shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return unto me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper in the thing whereto I sent it. Isaiah 55:11, KJV. Being confident of this very thing, that he which hath begun a good work in you will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. Philippians 1-6, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Take the promise in Jeremiah first, because it was spoken to mothers weeping over children who had been carried off, and God's answer to them is startlingly practical. Thy work shall be rewarded. He calls their weeping work, not weakness, not excessive attachment, not a failure to trust. Work, with a wage attached to it. The years you have spent praying for that person are not an emotional overflow that God tolerates. They are labor on the record, with a reward specified. And then they shall come again from the land of the enemy. He does not promise them ease. He promises their return. And notice how he addresses the exact fear you have not said out loud. There is hope in thine end, in your end. He speaks directly to the person who is afraid the answer will come too late, and he does not answer by promising a date. He says that hope belongs to the end of your story, wherever that end falls. What you have been calling too late is not a category God recognizes on this. Then, look at the sentence in 2 Peter that reframes the whole delay. The Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some men count slackness, but is long-suffering. The waiting you have interpreted as God's indifference toward your son or daughter, is described by God as His patience toward them. The delay is not evidence that He is not working on them. The delay is Him working on them, and refusing to close the door while there is still time. And notice what the father did about the older son, too, because you may have one of those. When the elder brother refused to come in, the father went out a second time that same day, out of his own celebration, into the field, to plead with the son who was standing right there and just as far away. He went out for both of them. That is, 2 roads walked in one afternoon by one old man, and neither son had earned the walking. So carry this out to your road. Keep walking down to the end of it. The old man in that story did not know which day it would be either, and he went out anyway, for years, and the running was in him the whole time. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. When you cannot feel what you believe, there is a season in a long faith that nobody prepares you for, and it is not doubt. I want to be precise about that, because it gets called doubt, and it is not. It is the season when the feelings go. You still believe every word of it. If someone challenged the resurrection, you could still answer them and mean it. But the warmth is gone. The verses that used to catch in your chest go past you now, like ordinary sentences. The hymns you sang for 60 years do not do what they used to do. Communion is a thing you observe rather than a thing that happens to you. You go through it all faithfully, and you come away feeling exactly as you did going in, and that is what frightens you, because you remember what it was like. That is the difficulty. Someone who never felt anything would not have a comparison. You do. You remember a season, perhaps a long one, perhaps a particular year, when God was near in a way you could feel in your body, when prayer had a warmth to it, when you would have said without hesitation that you knew He was there because you could feel that He was there. And now you cannot. And the arithmetic your heart does with that is brutal. Either He has withdrawn, or something in me has died. And there is a specific kind of shame that attaches to it. You are old in the faith. You are supposed to be past this. Younger people ask you things because you have been walking with God for longer than they have been alive. And you answer them well, and you go home to a heart that feels like an empty room. There is a further cruelty in it, which is that you cannot talk about it in the places where you would most want to. You could not raise it in a Bible study without it landing like a crisis, and everyone becoming concerned. You could not say it to your pastor, who is younger than your children. And you certainly could not say it to whoever it is that still looks to you as the steady one, because that person needs you to be what they have always found you to be. So it stays inside. And a thing that stays inside for years begins to feel like a secret. And secrets get heavier the longer they are kept. Let me take you to a man in a cave on a mountain. And I want you to notice that he arrived there directly after the greatest spiritual triumph in his entire life. And the exhaustion behind it should be counted, because Scripture counts it. He had stood alone against a nation for a full day. He had prayed 7 times for rain, sending his servant up to look at the sea and getting nothing, 6 times. Before the cloud the size of a man's hand appeared. Then he had run ahead of Ahab's chariot all the way to Jezreel, which is a distance of some 17 miles, on a body that had already given everything it had. Whatever happened under that juniper tree happened to a man who had spent every reserve he possessed and had nothing left in him at all. Elijah had just called fire down from heaven on Mount Carmel in front of the whole nation. 450 prophets of Baal had cried out to their God from morning until evening, cutting themselves with knives, and nothing had happened. Then Elijah had rebuilt the Lord's altar with 12 stones, dug a trench, drenched the whole thing in water 3 times, and prayed a prayer of about 60 words. And the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the sacrifice, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust, and licked up the water in the trench. The people fell on their faces. Then he prayed, and a 7-year drought broke. And the next thing that happens is that a queen sends him a threatening message. And this man, who had just done all of that, runs for his life into the wilderness, sits down under a juniper tree, and asks God to let him die. It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers. Note the timing. The collapse came after the mountain, not before it. Feeling is not a reliable instrument, and Elijah's went from fire on Carmel to a death wish under a bush in the space of about a day. And look at what God did about it, because it is not what any of us would do. He did not rebuke him. He did not remind him of Carmel or ask him where his faith had gone. God let him rest, and then sent an angel to feed him, twice, with baked bread and a cruse of water. And the second time the angel said, "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee." That is God's entire first response to his prophet's collapse: food and rest twice, and an acknowledgement that the journey was too much. And then, 40 days later, at Horeb, in a cave, came the thing everyone remembers. A great and strong wind rent the mountains and broke the rocks in pieces, but the Lord was not in the wind. Then an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. Then a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. Every dramatic, unmistakable felt phenomenon, the exact kind of thing Elijah had just experienced on Carmel, and God was in none of them. And after the fire, a still small voice. God deliberately withheld himself from everything that could be felt, and then spoke in the one register a person has to be quiet to hear. And maybe, as you listen to this letter, you are standing where Elijah stood at the mouth of that cave, having known the fire, and finding now that God has moved into a stillness you can barely detect. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words, and after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire, a still small voice. 1 Kings 19:12, KJV. If we believe not, yet he abideth faithful. He cannot deny himself. 2 Timothy 2:13, KJV. For we walk by faith, not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5:7, KJV. Who is among you that feareth the Lord, that obeyeth the voice of his servant, that walketh in darkness, and hath no light? Let him trust in the name of the Lord, and stay upon his God. Isaiah 50:10, KJV. For he hath said, I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee. Hebrews 13:5, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Look hard at the verse from Timothy, because it takes the whole weight off you. If we believe not, yet he abideth faithful. He cannot deny himself. His faithfulness toward you is not propped up by your ability to feel it, or even by the steadiness of your believing. On the days when belief itself flickers, he abides faithful. And the reason given is not that he is being generous with you. The reason is that he cannot deny himself. His constancy toward you is anchored in his own nature. not in the weather of your heart. You could not make him unfaithful if you set out to. A cloud cannot put out the sun by passing in front of it. And notice the question Isaiah asks, because it is one of the most extraordinary sentences in the prophets. Who is among you that feareth the Lord, that obeyeth the voice of his servant, that walketh in darkness, and hath no light? He describes a person who fears God, obeys God, and has no light. He does not treat that as a contradiction. He does not suggest the darkness is a symptom of disobedience. He simply grants that a faithful, obedient believer can walk in darkness and have no light at all, and then tells them what to do. Trust in the name of the Lord, and stay upon his God. When feeling gives you nothing, lean on the name. That is not second-class faith. That is the instruction God himself provides for exactly your season. Then take the still small voice. God had every dramatic option available and chose the quietest one, and he chose it for a man who had already had the fire. There's a kind of nearness God only gives to people who have stopped requiring the spectacle. The season you are mourning may not be his withdrawal at all. It may be the beginning of the conversation he could not have with you while the wind was still tearing at the mountain. And hear what God actually told Elijah in that cave, because it corrected a fact and not a feeling. Elijah had said twice that he alone was left. God's answer was, "There are 7,000 in Israel who have not bowed to Baal." The despair had not merely made him sad. It had made him wrong about the world, confidently and specifically wrong. That is what exhaustion does to the mind of a faithful person, and God treated it as a matter of information rather than a moral failure. So carry this back into your chair. When the coldness comes again and accuses you, do not check your feelings for evidence. They are the one instrument in you that has never been reliable. Answer with the verb he used. I will never leave thee. He said never in a season when Elijah could feel nothing, and he meant it then, and he means it about you now. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you, the one he crossed a sea to reach, and it does not feel like a wound. That is what distinguishes it from everything else in this letter. It feels like clear-eyed good sense, arrived at honestly by a person who has never thought too highly of themselves and does not intend to start now. I want to speak now to the suspicion that you are simply not important enough to warrant God's particular attention. It is not the same as feeling forgotten. It is more reasonable sounding than that, and therefore harder to dislodge. It goes like this: God is real. God is good. God attends to his people, but there are wars, there are children dying, there are believers in prison for their faith. And set against all of that, what am I? An old person in an ordinary house with ordinary aches. Surely it is right that his attention is elsewhere. Surely it would be a kind of self-importance to expect him to be concerned with the small trouble of one obscure life. You have probably even said something like that in prayer, meaning it humbly. I know there are people worse off than me, and the humility is real, but underneath it, something else is happening. You are quietly withdrawing your own case from his docket. You have decided, on his behalf, that you do not qualify. It has a respectable name, this suspicion. It calls itself perspective, and there is real truth in it. There are people suffering things you have never had to face, and you have always known that, and it has kept you grateful. But watch what it does when it gets into your prayer life. It edits. You begin bringing him only the large things, and only occasionally, and you handle the rest yourself because it did not seem worth mentioning. And the daily company you once had with him, the running commentary of a life shared with someone, goes quiet, not because he withdrew, but because you stopped bringing him anything small. And nearly everything in a life is small. So let me show you a journey God made, and I want you to count the cost of it against the number of people it was for. Jesus said, "Let us go over unto the other side." They crossed the Sea of Galilee into Gentile country, the region of the Gadarenes, land the Jews regarded as unclean, where pigs were farmed on the hillsides. On the way over, that storm came down through the ravines the way storms do on that lake, and the boat filled, and the disciples were certain they were going to die, and he stilled it with a sentence. They arrived on the far shore, and out of the tombs came a man. And picture the place itself, because Mark is unusually specific about it. The tombs on that shore were cut into the rock of the hillside, chambers hollowed out for the dead, and that is where he stayed and where he was when anyone came near. The village below could hear him at all hours. The crying in the mountains carried. Every person in that district had grown up with the sound of him and had learned to think of it as part of the landscape, the way you stop hearing a river. He had become a feature of the geography rather than a person. He had lived in the tombs for a long time. He wore no clothes. He had been bound with fetters and chains and had broken them. Nobody could tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. That is the whole picture. A naked man living among the dead, screaming, covered in his own wounds, so far outside human society that the only thing anyone had tried was chains. Nobody was coming for him. There was no one left who thought he could be reached. And Jesus crossed a sea and came through a storm and stepped onto an unclean shore to stand in front of him. Look at what he asks. "What is thy name?" He asks a naked, screaming man among the graves for his name. Nobody had asked that in years. The answer is terrible. Legion, for we are many. A name that is not even his, the name of what had taken him. But the question stands as one of the most tender things in the Gospels. Before anything else, he wanted the man's name. And he set him free. The unclean spirits went into the pigs, and the herd ran down into the sea, and the men who kept them ran into the city and told it. And here is how the region responded. They came out and found the man sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, the most complete restoration of a human being in the Gospels, and they were afraid, and they besought him to depart out of their coasts. They asked him to leave. The pigs had cost too much. So he got back in the boat. He had crossed a sea, come through a storm, arrived in unclean territory, restored one man, been asked to leave by everyone else, and gone home. The entire recorded fruit of that journey is one person. The healed man begged to come with him. And Jesus said, "No, go home to thy friends, and tell them how great things the Lord hath done for thee." And he went and published it throughout Decapolis, 10 cities, and all men did marvel. And maybe, as you listen to this letter, you are standing where that man stood among the tombs, certain your situation is too small, or too far gone, or too far out of the way to be worth the crossing. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words. And they came over unto the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gadarenes. And when he was come out of the ship, Immediately there met him, out of the tombs, a man with an unclean spirit. Mark 5:1-2, KJV. What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he lose one of them, doth not leave the 99 in the wilderness, and go after that which is lost, until he find it? Luke 15:4, KJV. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not therefore, ye are of more value than many sparrows. Matthew 10:30-31, KJV. He healeth the broken in heart, and bindeth up their wounds. He telleth the number of the stars. He calleth them all by their names. Psalm 147:3-4, KJV. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing? And one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father. Matthew 10:29, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Weigh the arithmetic of the shepherd, because it is deliberately bad arithmetic. 99 against 1, and he leaves the 99. No sensible manager of resources does that. It is not a story about efficient allocation. It is a story about a God who does not do allocation at all. You have been quietly assuming that his attention is a finite quantity, divided among the world's suffering, and that yours is a small claim on a strained supply. That is how human attention works. It is not how he works. He is not spread thin across the world's grief. He is entirely present with each one, which is a thing only God can do, and the exact thing he is. And look at what stands beside the broken heart in the psalm. He healeth the broken in heart, and bindeth up their wounds. And in the very next breath, he telleth the number of the stars. He calleth them all by their names. Those 2 sentences sit side by side on purpose. The immensity is not a competitor to the intimacy. The same God who has a name for every star in a universe we cannot measure is described in the same breath as bandaging wounds. That is not a God who has to choose between the galaxies and your kitchen. Then take the sparrow, which was the cheapest thing sold in that market. 2 for a farthing, and Luke's version says 5 for 2 farthings, which means the 5th one was thrown in free. Even the one that was worthless enough to give away does not fall without your Father. Not falls without his permission, necessarily. The text simply says without him. He is present at the death of the throwaway bird, and you have decided you do not qualify for his attention. And do not miss what became of that man. He asked to go with Jesus and was refused, and given instead the only assignment available to him: go home and tell your friends. He had no training. He had a decade of screaming in a graveyard behind him, and no other credentials at all. And he went through 10 cities with it, and all men did marvel. The most effective evangelist in that region was a man whose entire qualification was what had been done for him. So carry this with you. When the humility turns into withdrawing your own case, remember the boat that crossed a whole sea into unclean country, through a storm, for one naked man in a graveyard, and then turned around and went home. He does that. It is what he is like. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say. To you, the promise for the road that is left. There is one more ache, and I have saved it deliberately, because it is the one that sits under all the others, and it does not get said. You have begun to think about the end. Not morbidly. You are not a morbid person, and this is not despair. It is simply that you have arrived at the part of the road where the far end is visible, and it changes how a person walks. You notice it at funerals of people your age. You notice it when you update a document, or when a doctor uses a careful voice, or when you catch yourself thinking that you probably will not need to replace something because it will outlast you. And what people assume about believers is that this holds no fear for us, and that is not entirely honest. You have believed in the resurrection your whole life, and you believe it now. But belief in a destination is not the same as ease about a journey, and the part that troubles you is not the far shore. It is the crossing. It is the not knowing how or when, or whether you will be alone for it, or whether you will be able to hold on to your faith at the very end when everything else has been taken. And there is something more particular still, which almost nobody admits. You are afraid of being forgotten afterward, not by God, by everyone, that there will be a service, and it will be lovely, and then, within a few years, the people who knew your voice will be gone too, and after that, you will be a name on a stone that nobody visits, and eventually cannot read. And there is the practical side of it, which people are strangely unwilling to discuss with you, even though you have raised it. You have got your affairs in order, more in order, probably, than the people who avoid the subject. You have thought about what happens to the house and where things should go. What you have not been able to arrange, and what nobody can arrange for you, is the part that is not administrative. Nobody can tell you in advance what it will be like, and you have noticed that everyone changes the subject when you try, and so you have stopped trying, and you think about it alone. I want to take you to a man dying badly, in public, at the worst possible end of the worst possible life, because what he received in that hour is the answer to all of it. And it had been going on for hours by then. He had been scourged first, as they all were. He had been made to carry the crossbeam through streets where people he might have robbed could watch him do it. The charge against him would have been posted above his head for the crowd to read. Everything about the method was designed so that the dying man's shame would be as public and as prolonged as his pain, and it worked. That is why Rome used it. And in the middle of that, with his own execution still underway, he turned his head and did the only free thing he had left. There were 3 crosses. Crucifixion was designed to be slow and to be watched. It was capital punishment and public theater together. 2 thieves, one on either side, and both of them at first joined in the mocking. Matthew records that. They cast the same in his teeth. But at some point in those hours, something happened in one of them. He heard, presumably, the thing Jesus said about the men driving the nails. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And he stopped. He turned on the other thief and said something remarkable for a dying criminal. "Dost not thou fear God, seeing thou art in the same condemnation? And we, indeed, justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds. But this man hath done nothing amiss. He had nothing at all to offer. He could not be baptized. He could not make restitution to anyone he had robbed. He could not live a changed life. He had perhaps 3 hours left, and he could not so much as move his hands. He was, by every measure any religion has ever devised, out of time and out of options. And he said 11 words, "Lord, remember me, when thou comest into thy kingdom. Remember me." That is the entire prayer. Not save me, not forgive me, not get me down from here. A man whose name we will never know, who had nothing at the very end of a wasted life, asked only not to be forgotten. And the answer came at once, and it was more than he asked, Verily, I say unto thee, today shalt thou be with me in paradise. Look at everything that is in that answer. Today, not eventually, not at some distant resurrection he would have to wait out in the dark. That day, with me, not merely in paradise, but in company, and specifically his. And the whole thing given to a man with an entirely empty record, on the strength of 11 words spoken by a mouth that could do nothing else. That is how someone gets across, not by a lifetime of accumulated merit, and not by managing to be brave at the end. He was carried by the one dying beside him on the same day into company. And maybe, as you listen to this letter, you are standing where that man stood, near the end of the road, with nothing in your hands, asking only to be remembered. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words. And he said unto Jesus, Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom. And Jesus said unto him, Verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be with me in paradise. Luke 23:42-43, KJV. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Psalm 23:4, KJV. Even to your old age I am he, and even to hoar hairs will I carry you. I have made, and I will bear. Even I will carry, and will deliver you. Isaiah 46:4, KJV. The righteous shall be in everlasting remembrance. Psalm 112:6, KJV. For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Romans 8:38-39, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Look at the grammar of the valley in the psalm, because it is the most quoted verse in the world and the most misread. Though I walk through the valley, through, not into, not down to, and no further. It is a passage, with an entry and an exit, and the psalm describes a person moving the whole way across it. And notice what changes in that verse. David has been speaking about God in the third person for 3 verses. He maketh, he leadeth, he restoreth. The moment the valley arrives, the grammar changes to thou art with me. In the darkest sentence of the psalm, God stops being a subject that is discussed and becomes a person who is addressed. The nearness increases exactly where the darkness does. And weigh the promise in Psalm 112, since it answers the fear you have not said aloud. The righteous shall be in everlasting remembrance, not remembered for a generation or two, until the people who knew your voice are gone. Everlasting, human memory is a short and failing thing, and it will indeed forget you. There is no use pretending otherwise. But you were never being held in human memory. You are held in the memory of God, which does not thin, and does not lose the sound of a voice, and does not end. Then hear Paul's list, because he built it to be exhaustive on purpose. Death, life, angels, principalities, things present, things to come, height, depth, and then, in case anything at all had escaped the list, nor any other creature. He includes the thing you are afraid of by name and puts it first. Neither death. The one crossing you cannot picture is at the head of the list of things that cannot separate you from his love. And notice what Jesus did not require of him. There was no time for anything, no amendment of life, no restitution, no baptism, no proof. The whole transaction consisted of a man recognizing who was beside him and asking not to be forgotten. Everything the Church has ever taught about grace is contained in that exchange, and it was settled between two dying men in a few seconds, in public, on the worst afternoon in history. So carry this back into your chair. When the far end of the road comes into view again, remember what a dying man with nothing at all in his hands asked for, and how much more he was given, and how quickly. He asked to be remembered. He was answered with company that same day by name. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. The 52 that do not break. Let me bring the whole letter to one place now and speak to the last thing standing between you and rest. It is not that you doubt God's promises. It is that you have been let down by promises before, and something in you has learned. You were promised things by people who meant them at the time. Someone said always. Someone said I will be there. Institutions you gave your life to promised to look after you and then changed hands. A doctor said this will help. A pension said this much. A friend said I will call. And most of them did not lie to you. They simply could not deliver, because human beings promise out of intention and deliver out of capacity, and the two are not the same thing. So you have learned sensibly to hold promises loosely, and that learning has quietly leaked into the place it should never have reached. You read a promise of God now, and something in you adds a small hedge to it, a not quite, a we shall see. You do not do it on purpose. It is scar tissue, and scar tissue is not sin. It is what a body grows over a wound so it can keep working. But it means you have been holding the strongest things in the universe with the grip you developed for the weakest ones. So let me take you to one night, in a tent, in a strange country, where God did something so extraordinary that the whole logic of his promises rests on it still. And he had been living on that promise for years by then, with nothing to show for it. He had left Ur. He had left Haran. He had walked the length of a country he did not own, pitching tents on land that belonged to other people, on the strength of a word. He had grown old doing it. And when God spoke to him again in that chapter, Abram's first response is not worship. It is a plain and rather tired question about the fact that his household steward stands to inherit everything, because there is no son, and there is not going to be one. Abram was old and childless, and God had told him his descendants would be a nation. He asked, reasonably, how he could know. And God told him to bring a heifer, a goat, a ram, a turtle dove, and a pigeon, and Abram, who knew exactly what was being set up, divided the animals in half and laid the pieces opposite each other, with a path down the middle. This was a covenant ceremony, and everyone in that world knew what it meant. Two parties to an agreement would walk together between the pieces of slaughtered animals, and the walk was a sworn statement. If I break this covenant, let it be done to me, as it has been done to these. You were pledging your own body against your word. So Abram laid it out and waited, and drove off the birds of prey that came down on the carcasses through the long hours. And as the light failed, a deep and heavy stillness came over him, and a horror of great darkness. And then he saw a smoking furnace and a burning lamp pass between the pieces. God passed through, alone. Abram never walked that path. He was not permitted to. He lay there, unable to participate, while God alone went between the pieces of the covenant, which means God swore both halves of the oath. He bound himself to keep his side, and then he bound himself to bear the penalty if Abram failed his. There is no clause in that covenant that depends on the man, because the man lay senseless on the ground while it was sworn. That is the structure underneath every promise in this letter. Not an agreement between two parties, one of whom is you, and therefore only as strong as your weakest year. A covenant God made with himself about you, and he passed between the pieces alone. And centuries later, on a hill outside Jerusalem, in the dark, with the sun failing at noon, the penalty clause of that covenant was paid in full by the only party who ever signed it. And maybe, as you listen to this letter, you are lying where Abram lay in that darkness, unable to hold up your end, watching someone else walk the path for you. And this is what the Father says to you, in his own words. And it came to pass, that when the sun went down, and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace, and a burning lamp that passed between those pieces. In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram. Genesis 15 and 17 and 18, KJV. God is not a man, that he should lie, neither the Son of Man, that he should repent. Hath he said, and shall he not do it? Or hath he spoken, and shall he not make it good? Numbers 23:19, KJV. For all the promises of God in him are yea, and in him amen, unto the glory of God by us. 2 Corinthians 1:20, KJV. The grass withereth, the flower fadeth, but the word of our God shall stand forever. Isaiah 48, KJV. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. Matthew 24:35, KJV. Did you hear it? Those were not my words. They never were. Hear the question in Numbers, because it is a question and not a statement. And God asks it of you directly. Hath he said, and shall he not do it? He does not argue his reliability. He puts the burden back on the doubt and asks it to justify itself out loud. And he gives the reason first. God is not a man, that he should lie. Every promise that ever failed you failed because a human being made it, out of good intention and limited capacity, and the gap between the two is where all the disappointment of your life has come from. In God there is no gap. Intention and capacity are the same thing in him. That is the entire difference, and it is the reason your scar tissue is misapplied here. And look at what Paul says about where all the promises land. All the promises of God in him are yea, and in him amen. Not some of them, and not conditionally. Every promise in this letter, the name engraved on the palms, the tears in the bottle, the reward for secret things, the carrying to gray hair, the wiping of the face by hand, all of them are answered yes in one place, in Christ, and they are as secure as he is. They are not 52 separate hopes, each with its own odds. They are one person, and he is risen, and that is why not one of them can break. Then set the last two verses side by side, because they are deliberate measurement. The grass withereth, the flower fadeth, that is the shortest lived thing in the landscape. Heaven and earth shall pass away. That is the longest lived thing there is. God places his word above both, more durable than the mountains you have watched from your window all your life, more durable than the sky over them. You have spent years watching solid things prove temporary. He has told you plainly which thing in all creation will still be standing when the sky is gone, and it is the sentence with your name in it. So carry that back into the chair, and let it be the last thing you carry out of this letter. You were never asked to hold the covenant up. You lay in the dark, unable to move, when it was sworn, and someone else walked the whole path between the pieces, and paid the whole penalty, and rose. 52 promises, and every one of them rests on that. And that is why they do not break. The letter is not over. The Father has more to say to you. And now the letter draws to its close, though I want you to notice that nothing in it depended on you at all. You did not earn a single promise in these pages. You did not qualify for the God who saw Hagar at the spring, or the hands with your name cut into them, or the caring that goes all the way to gray hair, or the day that was promised to a dying man with nothing in his hands. Every one of those was given freely to someone who could not have obtained it any other way. And that is precisely why not one of them can be taken from you by anything that happens next. Not by your weakness, not by the years, not by a bad season, not by a heart that has gone quiet on you. 52 promises, one for every week ahead of you. And behind every one of them, a Father who has never once had to be reminded of your name. Before you go, let me ask one thing of you. If this letter has been company to you, share it with one person. You know someone living this exact ache, someone whose house has gone quiet, someone who has begun to think they are on a very long list. You do not need the right words for them. You never did. Hand them this letter instead, and let it say what you could not. And if you have not yet, the subscribe button below will make sure the next letter finds you without having to search. And leave one mark before you go. Is there someone you are praying for? You do not need to tell the story. You have carried it long enough without having to explain it. Just write for my son, or for my daughter, or for my sister, or for my friend. And this family will pray with you, and you will not be carrying that name alone anymore. May you carry this letter with you, folded inside your heart, sealed by his promise. This was a letter from the Father. Every word he spoke was scripture, and every word was for you. Until the next letter, you are loved, you are seen, and you are his.